The Netherlands, famous for its windmills and tulips, faced some scary hijackings in the late 1900s. These events showed weaknesses in the country's safety and tested how strong the Dutch people were. Schools and trains, places meant for learning and travel, became places of terror. The hijackings made the Netherlands face some hard truths and rethink how it kept people safe. The first scary event happened in a quiet Dutch town school. Armed men rushed into the building, taking students and teachers hostage. Everyone in the country was scared. The Dutch government had a tough choice: talk to the hijackers or risk the lives of innocent people. Soon after the school hijacking, another act of terror hit the Netherlands, this time on the trains. A normal train ride became a nightmare when armed people took over the train. This bold attack showed how unsafe public transportation was. The hijackings made the Dutch people think about their own safety and the threat of terrorism. June 1977, Bovensmilde, a small village, became a place of terror. Armed men took over a primary school, making it a jail. News spread and parents desperately tried to find out if their children were safe. The peaceful Dutch countryside was filled with fear and disbelief. The whole world watched Bovensmilde. Inside the classroom, time felt frozen, and everyone was scared. The hijackers, showing their weapons, walked around getting impatient. Outside, lots of police turned the village into a protected area. People worked hard to find a peaceful way to end this. After a week, there was a little bit of hope. The hijackers let some of the youngest children go free. This showed things might change. Negotiators tried even harder to get everyone home safe. Two years after Bovensmilde, another hostage situation happened on a train. Armed people took over a train, turning it into a moving jail. The news scared everyone again. The government promised to handle it seriously. The hijackers made demands, similar to the ones in Bovensmilde. The Dutch government had another tough choice, wanting to avoid another long standoff. Negotiators tried to talk to the hijackers, looking for a peaceful solution. Special forces were ready to act if needed. As days went by, things on the train got worse. The hijackers became harder to predict, and their threats got scarier. The hostages hoped to be free, but they were very stressed. The world watched, getting more worried every hour. It's hard to understand why the hijackers did this. Some felt like they were fighting for what was right. Others had extreme beliefs, filled with hate. They thought they were soldiers in a good fight, and the hostages didn't matter to them. To really understand the Dutch hijackings, we need to look at history. The events that led to these dramatic and desperate acts are deeply rooted in the complex and often painful history of the Netherlands and its former colonies. The story begins in the aftermath of World War II, a time of great upheaval and change for many nations, including the Netherlands. After World War II, the Netherlands lost its colonies. The war had left the country weakened and struggling to rebuild. The loss of these colonies was not just a blow to the nation's economy, but also to its national pride. The Dutch had long seen themselves as a colonial power, and the loss of their overseas territories was a bitter pill to swallow. One colony, the Dutch East Indies, was very important to them. Rich in resources and strategically located, it had been a jewel in the Dutch colonial crown for centuries, but Indonesia wanted freedom. The desire for independence was strong, fueled by years of exploitation and the global wave of decolonization that followed the war. The fight for Indonesian independence was long and violent. The Indonesian National Revolution, which lasted from 1945 to 1949, was marked by brutal battles and significant loss of life on both sides. The Dutch fought hard to retain control, but the determination and resilience of the Indonesian people could not be quelled. The Netherlands lost, and it hurt their pride. The lowering of the Dutch flag in Indonesia was a symbolic moment, marking the end of an era. Dutch soldiers returned home, many of them disillusioned and traumatized by the conflict. The loss of Indonesia was a significant blow to the Dutch national identity. A small group of islands, the South Moluccas, also wanted freedom. The South Moluccas had their own unique culture and history, distinct from the rest of Indonesia. When Indonesia gained independence, the South Moluccans hoped to establish their own independent state. However, their aspirations were not realized, leading to further tension and conflict. The South Moluccans felt betrayed by both the Dutch and the new Indonesian government. Their struggle for independence was ignored, and many South Moluccans were forced to flee to the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, they faced discrimination and marginalization, which only fueled their sense of injustice and desire for recognition. The seeds of discontent were sown. The South Moluccan community in the Netherlands became increasingly frustrated with their situation. They felt that their plight was being ignored by the Dutch government and the wider society. This sense of frustration and injustice would eventually lead to the dramatic and desperate acts of hijacking that shocked the nation. The South Moluccans had been loyal to the Dutch for many years, forming a unique bond that was forged in the fires of conflict and mutual reliance. This loyalty was not just a fleeting sentiment, but a deeply ingrained part of their identity. They fought with the Dutch in World War II, standing shoulder to shoulder in some of the most brutal battles of the conflict. Their bravery and dedication were unquestionable, and in return, they were promised some control over their own land, a promise that held the hope of a brighter future. However, the geopolitical landscape shifted dramatically after the war. Indonesia, newly independent from Dutch colonial rule, was not willing to grant the South Moluccans the freedom they had been promised. The dream of an autonomous South Moluccan state was met with resistance and rejection from the Indonesian leadership. In a bold move, the South Moluccans declared their own republic in 1950, hoping to carve out a space for their people in the post-colonial world. But Indonesia, determined to maintain its territorial integrity, launched military operations to quash the nascent republic. The South Moluccans' bid for independence was brutally suppressed, leading to widespread displacement and suffering. Many South Moluccans fled to the Netherlands, seeking refuge from the violence and instability that had engulfed their homeland. They arrived with hopes of finding safety and support from the Dutch government, believing that their years of loyalty and service would be recognized and rewarded. Unfortunately, the reality they encountered was far from what they had envisioned. The Dutch government, grappling with its own post-war challenges, did not provide the level of assistance the South Moluccans had expected. They were housed in temporary accommodations, often in isolated areas, and faced significant cultural and social barriers. Feeling abandoned and marginalized, many South Moluccans grew increasingly frustrated. Their sense of betrayal was profound, and some turned to extreme measures to draw attention to their plight. Protests and acts of civil disobedience became more common as they sought to make their voices heard in a society that seemed indifferent to their struggles. The South Moluccan struggle is a poignant reminder of the complexities of post-colonial transitions and the enduring impact of broken promises. Young South Moluccans, born in the Netherlands, heard stories about their lost homeland. These stories were filled with nostalgia and longing, painting a picture of a paradise lost, a place where their ancestors once thrived. The older generation spoke of the lush landscapes, the vibrant culture, and the sense of community that was torn apart by colonialism and political strife. For the young South Moluccans, these tales were more than just stories. They were a call to action, a reminder of their roots and the injustices their people had faced. They felt angry and betrayed. The promises made to their parents and grandparents by the Dutch government were broken, leaving them in a state of limbo. They were neither fully accepted in the Netherlands, nor able to return to their homeland. This sense of betrayal festered over the years, turning into a deep-seated anger. They felt like second-class citizens in a country that was supposed to be their new home. The frustration was palpable, and it manifested in various forms of protest and civil unrest. Some felt violence was the only way to get attention. In their eyes, peaceful protests had achieved little, and their voices were still unheard. The discussions in dimly lit rooms were filled with a sense of urgency and desperation. They believed that drastic measures were necessary to force the Dutch government and the world to pay attention to their plight. The idea of hijacking trains and buildings was born out of this desperation, a radical step to make their voices heard. The hijackings were a desperate act, a cry for help from people who felt ignored. These were not acts of senseless violence but calculated moves to draw attention to their cause. The hijackers hoped that by taking such extreme actions, they could force the Dutch government to address the issues facing the South Moluccan community. The somber crowds gathered outside the hijacked buildings were a testament to the gravity of the situation. It was a tense time, filled with uncertainty and fear. The hijackers thought they were fighting for a good cause, but their actions were a reminder of the problems of colonialism. The legacy of Dutch colonialism had left deep scars, and the South Moluccan community was a living reminder of that painful history. The activists spoke passionately about their cause, highlighting the injustices and the need for recognition and reparations. Their actions, though controversial, brought to light the lingering effects of colonialism and the need for a reckoning. The hijackings made the Netherlands face its past and the anger within its society. The events forced a national conversation about the country's colonial history and its treatment of the South Moluccan community. Public debates were heated, with opinions divided on the actions of the hijackers and the response of the government. The media coverage was extensive, bringing the issue to the forefront of public consciousness. It was a moment of reckoning, a time for the Netherlands to confront its past and address the grievances of a marginalized community. The hijackings were a huge challenge for the Dutch government. The lives of innocent people were at risk, and the country's reputation was important. The government wanted to save the hostages, but didn't want to give in to terrorists. Expert negotiators were brought in to talk to the hijackers and find a peaceful solution. The hijackings divided the Netherlands. Some people supported the government's strong stance against terrorism. Others felt the government should have talked to the hijackers more. The hijackings also made people afraid of the South Moluccan community, even though most of them weren't involved. The Bovensmilde siege lasted 3 weeks before the hijackers gave up. The hostages were safe, but they were changed by what happened. The train hijacking ended sadly. The hijackers shot some of the hostages before being stopped by special forces. Both events left the Netherlands with fear and sadness. The hijackings changed the Netherlands. People felt less safe and questioned their country's values. The events led to changes in government policies and how people thought about society. The country grieved for the victims and tried to understand what happened. The hijackings tested the Netherlands. Afterward, the country tried to improve its security and address the causes of extremism. Security was increased everywhere, and the police learned how to handle hostage situations better. The government also tried to make society more fair and inclusive. The hijackings were a terrible time, but they helped the Netherlands become